that. Other than some of the dynamics in Panic Song, everything else is just is going. And part of the idea with this album is they wanted it to be faster. Specifically, they wanted it to be darker. They wanted it to not have the shine that Dookie had.
What's up, everybody? How you doing? Welcome back to the Punk Rock Review Podcast. Today, we are going to talk about two albums that came out in 1995. They're two records that are hitting 30 years this year, and they're kind of massive. We've got Green Day's follow-up to Dookie, Insomniac. We also have No Use for a Name, Leche con Carne, and that album I think might actually require a little more conversation than the Green Day one. But we're going to start the day with a little bit of Green Day talk because it's a band that a lot of the youngsters still like, and I think it I don't know, people get mad when I talk about Green Day because they're like, they're not punk enough. Well, then don't watch the video. Like, I don't understand that. I don't understand being like, ooh, topic I'm not interested in. Click. Like, what? So by all means, complain if you want to. I don't care, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. Green Day's Insomniac came out in October of 1995 on the 10th. 14 songs at a far more brisk 32 minutes and 49 seconds than Dookie. Some of the notes that I wrote down, I put down that Dookie isn't a lot longer than this record. I don't know why I just jumped into this, dude. Mm-hmm. How are you doing, Rob? What's up, buddy?
I'm doing great, man. I mean, I'm as excited to talk about this stuff as you are.
Yeah, okay. Well, then we'll just jump right back into it, man. Like midway through the sentence, I was like, I didn't even ask him how he's doing today. What an asshole can I be? So, okay, Dookie is not a lot longer than this album. They're both 14 songs. Dookie's about 40 minutes. This one's 33, just under 33. But Dookie does include about 2 or 3 minutes of dead air with that song, the hidden track, All By Myself. But my point is that this album, it feels like it moves along a lot quicker. It's 25% shorter or something is what it feels like. It's not. It's only a few minutes shorter, but it feels like the flow of this album is just incredibly more, I don't know the word, man. It's just, it was built well.
Well, I think most notably the songs are very, very short. Even though there's 14 songs, they're all very, very short. So among the longest songs is you have Brain Stew at 3 minutes, which isn't a song that really drags, you know what I mean? And then you have Panic Song, which is like the epic song on this. It like is the song to be long on this. And then everything else, it's punk rock length. It's barely over 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So the songs kind of come and go really quickly. So that's why it feels like it's so much quicker to get through, I think, than Dookie. I think the spacing of this album's kind of weird too, because I feel like it's got little different sections to it that actually help it flow. I don't think it's as much of a ride of like different types of things here or there. I feel like different parts of this album actually kind of sound similar to itself as it goes along. But it's just I think what you're hitting on is just those small chunks that are there with a lot of 14 song album that still only clocks in at 32 minutes. And there's nothing really indulgent here, right? Other than maybe you can say Panic Song that has like the long where they're really sort of showing off. There's nothing like that here. There's nothing to show that like I'm the best at doing solos or I'm the best at doing that. Other than some of the dynamics in Panic Song, everything else is just is going. And part of the idea with this album is they wanted it to be faster. Specifically, they wanted it to be darker. They wanted it to not have the shine that Dookie had. And I think part of it is still keeping the punk rock shorter songs, and they wanted it not to be their rock record. And I think part of it was having the short songs.
That's funny because not wanting to have the sheen of Dookie, I listened to Dookie as well, just to kind of, because I was talking about this album, and when you talk about Insomniac, you're gonna talk about Dookie.
Yeah, it's really relevant.
And so I went back and forth with them and listened to them. And it really is a far glossier record with production, but the songs, like the actual structure of the songs, the riffs, the even like the lyrical content, it is darker than their first major label record. They had 2 before that, but I think they only had 2 before that, right? I think this is their 4th album total and their 2nd on a major. So but there's a grittiness to this group of songs that I don't personally find on the previous record, and I think that's important to note because I mean they've talked about it. That's something they went in there with intent, you know.
Yeah, and it's a few things. Like we're talking about this. We just talked about Dookie a lot last year because
Right.
these albums came out in back-to-back years, which is kind of mind-blowing thinking as big as Dookie was. Like the Dookie cycle didn't end. And
Right.
then like they went away and then they came back with Insomniac. Like they were still just going on Dookie and then this came up. So that's part of everything that there's two narratives that the band always puts out. One, it's that the reason why the songs are shorter, the lyrics are darker and all that is because they kind of had to be a little more old school with it and write it on the bus. Like they toured a lot on
Right.
Dookie kind of had like 3 tours on it where it's like the regular punk tour they were doing, the festival scene, and then the additional stuff after that kept getting kind of stacked on. So they kind of wrote it in the back of the bus, even though the songs are pretty well like produced, I think in their final form. Their original, like what they were made, were not the same songs that they had for Dookie. And then it was a reaction to Dookie. Like they were never going to make a heavy album, but they wanted to make like their fastest songs are on this. Again, their whole career, their fastest songs are on this album. They didn't like necessarily being painted as the bubblegum sugary band that they were, because they're really not. Like even they sound upbeat, but their lyrics have always had that dark kind of tinge to them, and they wanted this one to be like the darkest. And if you look at their whole career of their non-political albums, I think like Politics can always have real dark tones to it because that's just the nature of politics. Of
Right.
their personal stuff, which is most of what their career is, it's never as dark as this album is. Like there's not a lot of sunshine on this album whatsoever, which is really odd for a pop punk album and a band like Green Day that always has that. And a lot of the Gilman Street bands always have that kind of positive sort of tone to them. And this goes in kind of the other direction.
I barely consider them a pop punk band, so I totally understand that. I think that their lyrical content has never been glossy and super. Like you said, they have pop sensibility to their music, but I would say that they're more along the lines of like rock and punk rock versus pop punk. They just got really fucking popular. It's like, they're pop punk for the sake of like they have major label money behind them and they've got some catchy hooks, but like their actual guitar riffs, what they're playing, their the subject matter of the songs and records, none of that stuff is like Blink or Mest or Newfound Glory or Fall Out Boy or any of these bands that people do consider pop punk. Look, it's a gray area. I don't really care. I'm not planting my flag and going, I don't give a shit. Green Day has never been like a punk rock band to me either. They fall in this weird, like I said, gray area where they fit in a bunch of different categories. If you called them a punk band, I really wouldn't argue too much. If you called them a pop punk band, wouldn't argue too much. If you called them a rock and roll band, to my understanding, that's what they call themselves, a rock and roll band. So, but yeah, I do think that they got a little bit tired of being referred to as these, because they're not like Blink at all. Like their personality's not the same, and nothing about them is like Blink-182 outside their success.
Well, and then like what they really hated is like they were referred to as these overnight sensations, which like, yeah, to some extent they were, but like, no, it was their third album that, Dookie was their third album. This was their fourth album. They had they had toured with Bad Religion as a support act for a whole thing. Like they had been around, you know what I mean? It's not like they just were formed one night and it just blew up. So they took exception to and I would say Billy specifically, he took exception to the slights. Like I think a lot of the guys from our scene, like when they kind of make it or they get the flack or whatever, they're just sort of like the blinders on and they're going ahead because they're doing what they want to do, or they like overreact to it and make fools out of themselves. Well, Billy kind of had the thing where like he was kind of hurt with a lot of the criticisms that were leveled at the band. Like he really loved like the Gilman scene and all that. Like that was where he grew up. Like he was a kid of that. He was a product of that. And the way they were thought of and the way they were shunned. And again, compared to those other kind of bands, I think a notion of that too, that we have to remember is a lot of those other bands, the pop music they bring into punk is like mainstream pop music is what they bring in. Whereas with Green Day, the pop music they bring into punk is classic rock. It's rock music. Like we always say, they borrow more from stuff that's like on rock radio or from Queen and all that.
I was gonna mention that.
Yeah. And even, every album they've had, and there's a song or two on this one where you feel that sort of influence. But a lot of bands, it's their cop out to it's a marketing thing to say they're not punk and they're rock. But like Green Day can actually kind of claim that, like, they could be rock punk if that was a kind of a term. So I really think they wanted to differentiate themselves. At the same time, they're still Green Day, so it's not like when Rancid had the same conundrum in 2000. They made a really heavy record, with Rancid 2000. What's funny about Green Day is like, this is them being like angry and pissed off and vengeful, and it's still pretty darn catchy. It was still huge. This is their big, like, the album that quote unquote flopped after Dookie, and it still sold more than like anyone else can ever dream. It's just that one album they had was so big.
Insomniac was considered a flop?
Yeah, well, look at it like on the chart next to what Dookie sold and then what Insomniac sold. Now, in the end, it sold 7 million. But at the time, it was like this band had come out. They had this new record with all these aggressive songs, and yes, it was still doing very well, but it was no longer the hot thing.
I remember it being very, very popular, but it wasn't as popular as Dookie. Like,
that's what. And a lot of bands have that, and they usually die after those things. You know what I mean? Where they have that one album and they can never do it again. Relative to anything, and people always point this out. Like, people like to say that it's like it's Dookie and it's American Idiot, and then there's the fall in between. Yes, there's a fall in between, but that fall is only in comparison to those like two of the biggest records like in rock history, versus these big time ones. But Insomniac does have a weird place because it has the fewest amount of singles I think they ever released on one of their albums post Dookie.
I think that's one of the things I like about it, man, is it didn't get as much radio play, so I didn't get burnt out on the whole album.
They didn't market it in the same kind of way because they were touring off of Dookie. So like the lead video to Geek Stink Breath is like some dude's like dental surgery. That's like disgusting. MTV actually kicked it back and said that like, because it wasn't getting like a ton of demand, they weren't going to play it. They asked if they had, something. And again, this is the time when they're still playing the Green Day Dookie videos, and those are still doing really well. So it's not like
Well,
it's
the
not
only
like
reason
the public had soured on them. You know what I mean? It's just a piece of their catalog that wasn't as like received in the same kind of way.
Yeah, you can't really repeat the success of Dookie, though. I think it's kind of just a fool's errand to try to go out there and be like, we're going to do that again. Like, no, you're not. Go out there. Then I think that they approached it the right way. They just put out the best record they could, a little bit more angry. But, I mean, trying to repeat that. But the whole reason so these albums came out a year apart, right? Not really. Mm-hmm. They came out almost 2 years apart because Dookie was the very beginning of 94, and this came out in like the fall of 95. So they're like February 18, 19 months. Yeah, they're like 18 months apart or so. And it's like that's because of all the touring of Dookie. I'm not saying that they like intentionally did that. They just didn't have time to get back there and record from my understanding. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've grown to appreciate Dookie a lot over the past year, maybe year and a half. But I've always liked this record a bit more. I think maybe I was just more burnt out on the songs of Dookie getting played to death. I remember when this one came out, I absolutely loved it. And I didn't really jam Dookie like that when it came out. Like, I was immediately tired of it. I was always look, to be very clear, 94 is when Offspring and Green Day came out. Mm-hmm. I gravitated more towards Offspring immediately. I don't know why. I had both albums. I just liked the Offspring stuff better back then. I didn't like, what I didn't like? I didn't like the fact that the Green Day stuff, they did have a lot of like the Beatles sound in their music. Mm-hmm. And I fucking hate the Beatles, and I still don't like them to this day. I like Green Day, but I don't like the Beatles. And back then I was way more, what's the word, man? I was just narrow-minded with my musical choices. Like, I'm not going to act like I wasn't. I liked one kind of sound, and that was about it. And I wasn't my palate hadn't matured at all, and I wasn't ready to listen to like even like reggae music. I didn't like that, but I liked fast ska stuff. I wanted fast music. As I get older, I even like slow down punk. I like slow down ska, which is reggae, and I like not really. I'm not, but I'm just saying like I like a lot more down tempo stuff, more chill stuff. Lyrics has always been important to me, and vocal preferences have changed. But yeah, this album is really good, man.
And I should say, I talked about like the singles. With that said, like for me, this album was key for me really getting familiar with Green Day, because speaking of the singles, the one that was paired for me that I got on rock radio out here was the Brain Stew Jaded combo that I think a lot of people got on rock radio throughout the country, which for me, I would have found Green Day in like 97, 98. So this Nimrod and Dookie, it all kind of blends together, as basically
Right.
the same band, but that was by far of their early songs. My favorite was Brain Stew. I still think it's the best use of like the Crazy Train, Last Resort, pop, that real simple riff. It's the best use that anyone ever does. And it's like when you hear that song live or even play it on the guitar, mess around with it, like it's only a few notes, but it's still kind of really badass. And the way that Billy lets it ring out and all that, it's just like a really cool song that has nothing really going on in it. That's just something that like you could do in the basement. Like you said, that's a perfect song for the back of the bus, right? That he would just have strumming things, kind of singing along.
While I do appreciate the simplicity of that song and the ability for young kids to pick up a guitar and play it, I think it's necessary. I hate that song. Hate's a strong word. It's the only song on the album that I go, oh man, I've heard this a lot. Like it's laborious to get through a little bit. I still like the song. I get like way too polar with my words. I hate something when I don't really hate it. So I don't actually hate the song. I don't really love it, but I don't hate it. It is a very middle of the road song for me. But Jaded is like one of the best tracks on the whole record for me. But if you listen to it, you're gonna go, oh no shit. Like
it's great when you hear Jaded out of context too. Out of context meaning out of context from Brain Stew, because like your brain just goes, for your brain's too Jaded as if it's one song. And I think Jaded is like I think Jaded is they consider that their fastest song in terms of like a punk rock song that's just not like one bit, like, like, and I don't know if that's exactly true, but at the time when they recorded it, they felt that is, and it's fun because there's not a lot of that kind of fun on this album. And that's a piece of it. That's a piece of it. This song, this album to me is more heartfelt, almost you could say it's dark, but it's more, as they say, they call it, it's their rawest record, where they were kind of saying, what they meant off the top of their head. It's one where I think for better, they didn't think too hard about some of these songs lyrically.
That's why, for better on this.
I appreciate it. Yeah, you do appreciate it. I think going forward, when they went forward with Nimrod was back to that Beatles sensibility.
We're gonna talk about that in a minute too.
Like you're talking about, and so that more comes with that sort of overall impression of Green Day. So this one kind of gets tucked in. It's like the dirty little heavy album in between all the normal Green Day, but it's as iconic as all of them. I think the artwork is as good as any of the artwork for any of the Green Day albums. It's as cool. That was also part of the intent, like with the imagery they had in there, because Dookie would look like a cartoon and a comic. So they wanted this to look, it was very, very, very intentional. And they were a very pissed off band. Like they talk about, as far as Headspace, when they made this, like they had made it, but they had not really felt like the fruits of that labor quite yet. They were still just getting crap from people and that kind of stuff.
Right.
So it really hadn't settled in. Like I said, they were on tour for so long that they weren't even home for a while after Dookie really had popped to really even know like how much their lives had improved or anything like that, because they were going so far on.
Can you imagine that? Imagine dropping an album and then you leave your like 3-bedroom house that you're stressing to pay your rent on, and you get home and you literally can afford like a 12-bedroom house with 5 bathrooms and a 4-car garage and the cars to put in there, like, and that's not even an issue. And like, I just can't even imagine that. Like,
it has to mess with the head of like anyone who goes through, whether you're an athlete or you're in business and you do that. But like, especially if you're these guys where that's just not in the, like, it's not even like if you're going to be a pro athlete, whenever you're going to the NFL, you at least are anticipating getting rich at that point.
Right.
These guys, when you look at the arenas they were booked out of that first tour, Dookie was supposed to be a regular album. You know what I mean? They are booked into punk venues, and famously they were like overrun, and those venues had a really difficult time. And that's part of what added to, like, there's the all the riots that happened when Green Day was touring off of Dookie. When it comes down to it, there's about 3 of them that it's noted for, like these really big issues that happened. And it's just because like this band was booked for places that it was too big for. So you have like a radio station event that was like a free event that turned into like a big old thing in Boston. It's because like, you have this little, a normal punk band that some college kids are going to go to. No, you offer a free concert with Green Day in 1994, and it turns into a literal, riot. And that kind of stuff was was happening just sort of all the time with him. So they were a bit worn out. They took a break before Nimrod, and then they took a lot of breaks in and out until American Idiot, where they kind of like refocused and reformed as a band and set that like legacy track that they're on now.
Well, American Idiot was like the rebirth of the band, like in general. It was like they came back out and had Dookie all over. It was weird.
Yeah, and
except
they were refocused though too, like in like to their careers in the same kind of way. It's almost like the way they almost relaunched their careers. I feel like in some ways
that's kind of what I meant. It's like they started over almost, and it's like, yeah, I don't know. Speaking about this album though, man, Geek Stink Breath. It's got one of my favorite like guitar riffs and like vocal melodies. It's really catchy. It's very sing along worthy. I really like Bob Zavula Who, Jaded, Stuart and the Ave. Those songs are really good. No Pride. That song reminds me of Dookie a lot, man. I was listening to it and I was like, this one might have been written before they got to these other songs. Like this might be an older one, and it might be something they wrote. Who knows, man? Who knows? 5 years ago, who knows? But while listening to this album today, to refresh myself with it, I realized something. What's first minute of Panic Song is a bass line that just sounds like anxiety. I've listened to this album so many times and I've never realized that. It's like this it gets more and more frantic. It's just like, I don't know. I never put that together with the name of the song being Panic, that's what they were doing, was trying to get you to have this anxiety ridden. Then they start going into the vocals, and it's just interesting to, after 30 years, still be learning something about a record that I actually owned and enjoyed my whole life.
Yeah, and Mike has talked about that at the time that was as fast. He says now he can play that song kind of and play at those tempos just because he's learned to do it. But at the time, their goal was just like, how fast can I get? It was that sort of show of like, how can we do that to create that sort of thing? And then Trey was matching him on the drums as they went through it. And then so it's almost like two songs, and then it goes into the lyrical part, which sort of it explains it all. I love that.
It changes it quite a bit when the vocals come in.
I love that section on this album. Like I was saying, I think if he goes from basically Armitage to No Pride, I feel like those could have been Dookie tracks. The start of the album, I feel like is, and for some of the negative reviews that this album had, like when it first came out as being like just a Dookie ripoff, which I don't think it is. I think if you thought that, it would be from those first couple of songs. I think those ones are more similar to Dookie style.
Because I think when I hear Armitage Shanks, it sounds nothing like Dookie to me. And then maybe it's the production. It might be the production more so than the songwriting. But when I hear that, I don't think Dookie at all. I mean, it sounds like a whole different band. It probably is the production, because now that I'm thinking about it, the music itself sounds a little bit like some of the stuff off Dookie.
I will say though, for me, this album really just hits into like another stratosphere once you hit 86, which is to me like maybe their most not their most underrated song, but like their best of the non-big Green Day songs. It's right.
Oh man, I like Stuart and the Ave, dude. Stuart and the Ave it's got
that was
amazing
pretty cool.
vocal melodies, dude. It was a deep cut that I liked in high school, bro. That song is awesome.
So if you go, you get 86, which I love, which again, it's about Gilman Street, it's about all that good stuff. You got the Panic song, which we just talked about, taking you into Stewart Avenue, which brings you kind of back down, at least like from the pace of it. And then that Brain Stew Jaded thing. And then you're going towards the end, which I've always loved. Westbound Sign and Taiwan Hill are fine, but Walking Contradiction is another one of those kind of underrated songs that I say underrated because everyone likes it, but one of the non top tier songs that I could appreciate.
This is what I wrote at the end of listening to the record. Like right at the end when it closed, I wrote a little blurb. I'm going to read it in its entirety real quick. I put, Walking Contradiction is a fantastic closer for an album like this. It leaves us on an upbeat high note, wanting more, possibly getting you to start the album over. Before streaming, that didn't matter at all, or if it did, it was way less, of course. But it's a great closer in my opinion. And I put, the band plays very well in this record. The album is peak Green Day. So the highs of Dookie are a little higher, I think. Like there are a few songs that are outright perfection on that record. But there are a few songs that I either skip or outright don't like. Whereas on Insomniac, there are no skips for me at all. It is solid all the way through. For that reason, I rate this album better. And it's not like the singles or peaks of this album are really that far off from the ones on Dookie. They're really not. I'd say that they're not quite as iconic, but the rest of the album is also better than the other stuff on the album outside of the singles and whatnot. So I guess it depends on if you'd rather have like higher highs and lower lows or more of an even quality throughout the album. But obviously I prefer the latter, and I put in all capital letters, Insomniac is Green Day's best album, and I stand behind that. I think that Insomniac is in fact Green Day's best record.
No, and I think that's I would have it
super subjective
further down on the list, but it's with the Green Day albums, there's like the good ones, and then there's like the all right ones. You know what I mean? The ones that are like that count as the super important.
There's
like
a few
awesome.
bands like that,
and this one, it's right in there. It's, for me, it's one of those that if like I can picture having this, and I remember my cousin gave me this album. He gave me a bunch of albums because I like rock or whatever. He did like the rock albums, and it's like there's no way you got this in the '90s if you had Smash, if you had some of these other albums and thought it sucked. You know what I mean? There's just no way. Maybe if you were like a Dookie fan and that was the style and you got it and you thought like, oh, this band isn't very fun. But if you were into that sort of like just that hard rock alternative that this was sort of appealing to, like, there's no way that this album like was, could it be anything other than like a cool album, I think, to the people in that time frame.
Well, in 2027, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but Nimrod is really the album where people fell off. People really, it was a whole new generation of fans that it was just like, honestly, it's kind of like that Rancid 5 argument where I don't really like that record much, but I was around when Now Come the Wolves came out, and I like Let's Go, Out Come the Wolves, Life Won't Wait. So when that record came out, I was expecting a particular sound. But the kids that were like 16 when that album came out, that's like their favorite Rancid album. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Green Day. When they like the high school kids that were in 9th grade hit Nimrod was their first introduction to Green Day, they love that record. But if you're like 23 at that point and you're used to listening to, what the Kerplunk and 1039, and then you get Dookie, and then you get Insomniac, and then you get Nimrod, and their big single is this like acoustic ballad. You're like, what the fuck? I remember people being pissed, and that song was huge, dude. It was everywhere for years, dude. I couldn't get away from that damn song, and I liked the song, and I still couldn't get away from it. I'm like running, stop singing that fucking song, Billy, stop. And it did a little fake stop, I'm like, oh my goodness, bro. Great song, man. Great song. Like, as I get older, I really do appreciate it. But Nimrod's the one where I think people started to really fall off the Green Day wagon.
Yeah, I think
my experience.
I think we'll talk about this as the years go on and we keep talking the anniversary. I think their story, and I made a video about it years ago for this reason, and it did fairly well. It was like the time kind of after, I guess after this period, because this Insomniac still kind of connected to Dookie, like it's so close in proximity.
I agree.
Right after, like it's like after this, then they're rock stars. Then what happens?
It's like they matured a little bit too. Like this album's a little more mature than Dookie.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's even called something a little more mature. Like you got Dookie and cartoon cover, and then you've got Insomniac with a more artfully done cover, if that makes any sense. It just feels like they were growing up as humans.
Yeah. And again, they were, you were talking about like those first batches of songs. They were super young when they wrote like a lot of them, but eventually,
oh yeah.
The music's gonna sound a little different. I have to say something. I've been thinking about it. So last year I said that I think there's an argument that Billy Joel might be like the greatest like frontman like in rock history. Like when you take them all together. I actually think I have another hot take.
1 second, I apologize. I gotta let my dog out of the room.
Go ahead.
All right, big guy. Go. Oh. At least I won't have to cut that out. It took me 2 seconds. So anyways, okay. Yeah, dude, that was a bold statement you just made. Billy Joe's the greatest frontman of rock. I mean, have you seen Tim Armstrong play guitar live?
Yeah, but I'm comparing him more to like the like iconic rock singers.
Oh no, it was a joke about how bad Tim is live. I was
right. I thought his guitar playing, obviously, yeah.
Oh man, I love it, but it's like I've seen him play really well, but I've seen him play really bad. So, anyways, go ahead, continue your thought.
That's what. No, but my half serious thought that I've really been trying to mull on is like, is Green Day, and in terms of like grand scale and all these things, does Green Day have a legit look at being the greatest like rock band that's ever existed? Like what I'm talking about, like in terms of like competing with like the Beatles and the Stones and those kind of bands, like they have the longevity of like any of those bands. They have like a catalog of
They don't yet because they haven't been around as long.
Well, yeah,
But
maybe
but
like
they're
not
still
next to like the Stones, but I mean, like you do have about a 4-decade run of like top albums in all of those decades. You have all these massive tours, all these sales record, all of this. So I'm wondering, like, can they compete? Like, are they legit? I know you would think about, yeah, they're one of the big selling bands, but
so
like, can we make a legit argument for them being like the biggest rock or the greatest, I guess you would say, not biggest or however you would define it, like rock band ever?
this is gonna be a rare thing, man. But
Hmm.
I'm gonna agree with you.
Oh shoot.
I know, right? I think
On a
you thought I
hot
was gonna be
take,
like, what the
that's not
so
planned. Yeah.
okay, so and here's my response to that.
Hmm.
I'd say nobody can really say that you're wrong because I bet they outsold a lot of those bands. So if you're gonna go
Right.
with like, oh, they didn't sell as much, they probably did. But they just put out another album that, in my opinion, while I don't like the album as much, it is monumentally important to an entirely different generation of people.
Hmm.
Again, they did that shit in the 90s, the 2000s, and now the 2020s. And you're telling me that this band's not more relevant or as important as the Beatles, the Stones, Aerosmith, Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix? Like, what are we talking about here? Are they the best guitar players? I don't know. Not really, but that's not what we're talking about. Now, I don't think that they could exist without the Beatles, but I don't think Rancid could exist without the Clash, and I find them far more important than
Hmm.
like the Clash to a certain group of people. So it just depends on who you are, where you came from. I'd say people that are older than us would probably disagree. People that younger than us might agree wholeheartedly, though. And I think people our age would be a pretty mixed bag. But I really can't argue with that. I think that there is a argument there for them being the what's the word we're going to use? We're going to use biggest, best, or most important because those are all three very different things.
Yeah, I don't know if like is biggest. I think big or like
Okay,
great.
I would say that they're in the runnings for the biggest.
Yeah,
I would say that they're
or
also.
grandest. I don't know. I don't know how like
I
yeah. I
would
guess
say that,
that's so
as far
big.
as best and most important, it's like a two-pronged question. I think that like most important would probably be the Beatles,
Hmm.
but the best still may be Green Day because they've
Yeah.
got like song for song that they're competing. I don't know. It's very subjective. All heads are gonna get real pissed off. Like music snob types might get real pissed off, but whatever, man. It's 40 something years and they're still at the top. Like, what are we talking about? Rolling Stones, they still tour, they still do stuff, but they're not putting out new music that is that important
Mhm.
40 years later. I just don't think they are. Neither
Right.
the Beatles or any member of the band.
And when bands have
Yeah,
done
that's
that,
crazy.
when bands like say Aerosmith, like when they had a big hit in 2002, like that was sort of the narrative like around them. And you look at like the scale, and like that's basically where Green Day would be. Green Day's even sort of
Right.
surpassed that. So again, I think it's almost going to be for the next generation to answer because it's going to be hard because for us or for like the old heads, it'll just be hard. Like I remember people getting mad when Green Day got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as if they don't deserve to be there. It's like what just because other bands have been snubbed does not mean that they are not like
Right.
this super. So I think like once people who like make music history aren't thinking of Green Day as three punks from from San Francisco and just thinking of them the way we can think of stuff without the context of it probably won't be that crazy of a question. So that's why it's a thought that's been swirling around it. I've been thinking about that for like over a year, ever since I saw Green Day, and just kind of sort of absorbed how big they were even in comparison to like their peers. Like
Yeah.
it just made me sort of think like, shoot, how big is Green Day like really like on that biggest scale? Because there's just nothing in punk rock we ever quite think of that's that big.
Well, I don't consider them have to be a part of punk rock outside the fact that they still like a punk rock, like they still enjoy it and they're still friends with those people. They're stadium rock at this point,
Mm.
but they still take bands like Rancid on the road, give them what I would imagine is a fairly nice paycheck, and it's like that they don't have to do that. That's really nice, man. I think that's cool of them to do. But I had the same experience when I was at that same exact tour that you went to. I literally thought like, holy shit, I didn't realize that this is what we were going. I just didn't realize that they were this kind of. They played at like what the Dodger Stadium or some shit like that's
Oh yeah.
crazy, dude.
And,
Like
and
they
like you know it, but like when you're really like absorbing it, it's like because you these sort of bands that are huge, you almost take them for granted because they like and
right.
they've been so big, they've been big for so long. But when you think about it, even compared to like bands that again like that you would see sort of on par with them, like they just sort of dwarf them.
I
It's
would
interesting.
okay. This is how we can word it. My
Okay.
apologies.
Oh yeah, go for it.
We can say that they like objectively belong in the same conversation with the Beatles, Queen, the Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, etc., etc., etc. they go in that conversation. If you're going to talk about who's the greatest rock band, is it? And you list off 5 bands, in my personal opinion, there is no time where that should not include Green Day.
Yeah. Yeah. I think,
I'm not their biggest fan, and there's plenty of stuff that they do and that I don't care for. But we're speaking about something that I think I have to take my opinion out of it and just go, okay, objectively from this point of view, like what am I looking at here and going, kind of hard to argue. It's like talking about a Scorsese flick. I don't necessarily care for them all the time, but they're objectively well made. I mean, he's a great director. What do I mean?
I'm glad you got my drift on where I was going with that. Like I wasn't trying to be as ridiculous as it sort of sounded.
At first when you said it, I was like, "You're retarded," and then I started thinking about it, and I was like, "Well, I don't know. Maybe you'd be retarded to argue against it because, I mean, there's so many metrics you can pull up to go. Well, then okay, what about this?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
if they're not that great, then how come they sold like the Beatles sold? If they're not that great, how come their tours are so important? If they're not that great, then how come they have another really monumentally important album 4 decades into their career? Like how is that not important and great and big and good? And I don't get it. And then also seeing them live, I also got to understand how good they are as musicians, like what their talent level is. And I think it is far, far better than they get credit for, especially from like stubborn old punk rock guys. So, man, Insomniac, dude, great album, man. Happy birthday to it. Turning 30 this year? Yeah, that's
30,
crazy.
yeah.
Man, it makes me feel super, super old.